There is a moment that comes to every space marine who lives long enough. A moment when time itself becomes the enemy. Not the Xenos hordes, not the heretical traitors. Not even the daemons crawling from the warp. Time, the slow, inexorable march of centuries that grinds away at memory, at identity, at the very concept of self. For most space marines, this moment never arrives. They die in battle long before the weight of years can settle upon their transhuman shoulders. But for those who survive, for those whose skill or fortune keeps them breathing through campaign after campaign, there comes a day when they look around and realize a truth more horrifying than any battlefield carnage. They have been fighting for 500 years. 500 years. To put that in perspective, when this warrior was recruited, entire dynasties had not yet risen. Technologies that now seem ancient were cutting edge. Worlds that are now charred wastelands were thriving hive cities. And he has been there through it all, his bolter never silent, his armor never clean, his duty never complete. The galaxy has churned through generations of baseline humans. Families have lived and died. Civilizations have risen and fallen. And through it all, this space marine has simply continued to fight. The horror is not in the fighting itself. Space marines are made for war. Their very genetics have been rewritten to crave battle, to find purpose in destruction. No, the horror lies in the realization. The moment when a veteran looks at a new recruit and cannot remember his own recruitment. When he tries to recall his first battle and finds only a blur of identical conflicts. When he attempts to count the years and discovers he has lost track somewhere in the 3rd century. When he understands with crystal clarity that he has outlived everything he once knew and will likely outlive everything he knows now. This is the story of that moment. The moment when a space marine truly comprehends the curse of his longevity. When he understands that the honor of service is also a prison from which there is no escape except death. And in the grim darkness of the far future, death is a mercy rarely granted to the Emperor's finest warriors. In the Imperium of man, where 1 billion souls die every day and are replaced by 1 billion more, time moves differently for different beings. For the common citizen of a hive world, life is measured in decades if they are fortunate. 30, perhaps 40 years of toil and suffering before disease, starvation, or industrial accident claims them. For the nobility, time can be extended through rejuvenate treatments and augmetic replacements, stretching a lifespan to perhaps 2 or 3 centuries. But for the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, time becomes something else entirely, something cruel. The average Space Marine, if such a thing can be said to exist, will serve for 200 to 300 years before death claims them. Not from age, but from the endless wars that define the 41st millennium. A bolter round through the helmet, a xenomorph's claws through the chest, an orbital bombardment that leaves nothing but ceramite shards and scorched bone. The galaxy is a meat grinder, and space marines are fed into it constantly. But some survive. Some, through skill or luck, or the inscrutable will of fate, continue breathing when all logic says they should be dead. These are the ancient ones, the veterans whose service is measured not in decades but in centuries. Warriors who have fought in so many campaigns that their armor bears kill markings from conflicts the wider Imperium has forgotten. Space Marines who remember wars that have been expunged from official records, who carry memories of purges and xenocides that never officially occurred. And with that longevity comes a burden that would break a lesser mind. To understand this burden, we must first understand what a Space Marine is. Not the propaganda image of the Emperor's angels descending from the sky to save humanity. Not the legend of invincible warriors who know no fear. We must understand the reality. The biological horror, the psychological conditioning, the transformation that turns a human child into something that can barely be called human anymore. The process begins with selection. Somewhere in the Imperium, on one of 1 million worlds, a child catches the attention of the Adeptus Astartes. Perhaps he displayed unusual courage in defending his settlement from raiders. Perhaps he survived conditions that killed all his peers. Perhaps he simply possessed the correct genetic markers that the chapter's apothecaries seek. Whatever the reason, he is chosen, taken from everything he knows. His old life ends the moment he steps into the fortress monastery. The child is usually between 10 and 14 years old enough to have developed some sense of self, some memories of who he was, young enough that his body can still accept the genetic modifications that will remake him. This is important. The age matters because later, centuries later, when he tries to remember who he was before the transformation, those memories will be there. Faint, dreamlike, but present. A name he no longer uses. A face he can barely recall. A life that feels like it belonged to someone else entirely. The transformation takes years. 19 separate seed organs must be implanted into the recruit's body, each one radically altering his physiology. A second heart to pump blood through his enhanced cardiovascular system. Additional lungs that allow him to breathe toxic atmospheres. Glands that can neutralize poisons and process radiation. An organ that lets him eat the flesh of the dead and absorb their memories. One that turns his sweat into acid. Another that hardens his skin against vacuum and extreme temperatures. Each implant is a surgical violation, a forced evolution that would kill a normal human. But the physical changes are only part of the transformation. The psychological conditioning is equally profound, perhaps more so. This is where the recruit truly stops being human and becomes something else. Something that will eventually realize it has been fighting for 5 centuries. Hypno-indoctrination begins early in the process, usually around the 6th phase of organ implantation. The recruit is placed in a device called a hypnomat, a chamber filled with neural interfaces and conditioning equipment. Inside, he is subjected to hours, days, weeks of subliminal programming. Battle doctrine is implanted directly into his subconscious. Tactical knowledge that would take decades to learn through conventional training is downloaded into his mind like data into a cogitator. His personality is reshaped, smoothed down, filed into a form more suitable for eternal warfare. The hypno-indoctrination serves multiple purposes. It teaches the recruit how to use his new organs, how to control metabolic functions that were once purely autonomic. It instills unwavering loyalty to the Emperor and the chapter. It removes fear, or at least buries it so deep that it rarely surfaces. And crucially, critically, it alters how the recruit perceives himself. His childhood memories become hazy, indistinct, like a half-remembered dream. His sense of identity shifts from who he was to what he has become. He stops thinking of himself as a person with a past and starts thinking of himself as a weapon with a purpose. This is by design. The creators of the Space Marines understood that to make a warrior who could fight for centuries without breaking, you had to remove the psychological anchors that define humanity. Family, home, personal desires, all of these become irrelevant. What matters is the chapter. What matters is the mission. What matters is the endless war. But here is the cruel irony. While the conditioning makes a Space Marine capable of fighting for centuries, it does not prepare him for the psychological reality of actually doing so. The hypno-indoctrination can suppress fear and strengthen loyalty, but it cannot make a mind immune to the corrosive effects of time. It cannot prevent the slow erosion of self that comes from outliving entire civilizations. It cannot stop the moment when a warrior realizes he has been fighting for 500 years and has lost track of who he once was. By the time the transformation is complete, the recruit has become an initiate. He is taller than any natural human, standing over 7 feet in his bare enhanced flesh. His bones are fused with ceramite, making them nearly unbreakable. His muscles are reinforced with enhanced fibers that give him strength to crush a human skull with his bare hands. His nervous system has been rewired to process information at superhuman speeds. He can see in almost total darkness, hear frequencies beyond human range, and control his body's functions with such precision that he can survive being shot through the chest by simply shunting blood flow around the wound. He is also, by this point, barely 16 to 18 years old, a teenager, technically, though the concept has no meaning for him anymore. His body is fully mature, forced into adulthood by the hormonal cocktail that the seed organs produce. His mind has been stripped and rebuilt. He remembers being a child on some distant world, but those memories are faint and unimportant. What matters now is that he is a space marine, an angel of death, the Emperor's finest weapon in a galaxy that devours souls. The initiate joins his brothers and begins his service. For the first few decades, time still makes sense. He fights in campaigns that have clear beginnings and endings. He forms bonds with his squad mates. He learns the traditions of his chapter, the litanies and rituals that give structure to the endless war. He is young, in Space Marine terms, and the weight of years has not yet settled upon him. These early decades are, in retrospect, the closest a Space Marine will ever come to normalcy. He understands how old he is. 20 years old, 30, 50. The numbers still mean something. He can track his service and measure his growth. He remembers his first kill, his first wound, his first deployment to a war zone. The memories are sharp and clear, not yet buried under centuries of identical experiences. During this first century of service, the young Space Marine also maintains some connection to the passage of time in the wider Imperium. He sees baseline humans aging around him. The serfs who maintain the fortress monastery grow old and are replaced by younger ones. Officers in the Imperial Guard that he fights alongside go from fresh-faced commanders to grizzled veterans to honored dead, all within what feels like a heartbeat to his transhuman perception. Planetary governors rise and fall. Entire regiments are raised, deployed, and wiped out. At first, this is merely an observation. The young Space Marine notes that baseline humans are fragile, their lives brief and inconsequential. This is what he was taught during his indoctrination. Mortals are to be protected, but they are not his equals. They are like mayflies, living and dying in the time it takes him to clean his bolter. He does not mourn their passing, because his conditioning has taught him not to form attachments to beings who will inevitably perish. But somewhere in those first few decades, a seed of understanding is planted. When a serf who served him as a scout has aged into a frail old man while the Space Marine has not changed at all. When a planetary governor who greeted him as a young man now greets him as an ancient lord, not realizing that from the Space Marine's perspective, they only met a few years ago. When a brother from the same recruitment batch falls in combat, and the young warrior realizes that this is the first of many who will not see their second century. The first century passes. The Space Marine has fought in dozens of campaigns. He has killed thousands of enemies. His armor bears the marks of countless battles. He has been promoted from scout to full battle brother, earned his place in a tactical squad. He knows his role, knows his weapons, knows his duty. He is exactly what the Emperor designed him to be. And he has no idea that he is at the very beginning of a journey that will stretch across 5 centuries. The second century of service is when patterns begin to emerge. Patterns that the Space Marine does not initially recognize as significant, but which will eventually contribute to the horrifying realization that defines this story. He fights a campaign against an Orc Moe AGH. It is brutal, chaotic, a grinding war of attrition that lasts for months. Greenskins are purged from world after world, their crude fortifications demolished, their war bosses slain. The Space Marine distinguishes himself in battle, earns commendations, perhaps a promotion. The campaign ends. The chapter returns to its fortress monastery. Time passes. Then another call comes. Another Orc Warrior has emerged in a different sector. The Space Marine deploys again. The battles are different in the specifics but identical in essence. Crude Xenos technology. Overwhelming numbers met with superior discipline. Victory purchased through bolter and blade. Years later it happens again and again. The Space Marine begins to realize that he has fought orcs dozens of times. The names of the worlds change. The specific tactical situations vary, but the fundamental experience is always the same. He starts to blur together. That battle on Kaldrak IV, where he held a choke point against 300 greenskins. Or was that on Ghost? Or was it during the Tarvis campaign? The details escape him. They all feel like the same battle, repeated endlessly across a galaxy that produces an infinite supply of enemies. This is when temporal disorientation begins to creep in. Not severely, not yet. but enough that the Space Marine occasionally loses track of when something occurred. He remembers events clearly, but placing them in chronological order becomes difficult. Was the siege of Hive Primus before, or after the boarding action against the Chaos Cruiser? Both were significant battles, both are stored in his enhanced memory with perfect clarity. But the sequence becomes muddled. Years blend together because each year is filled with the same essential activity: war. Around his 120th year of service, the Space Marine reaches a milestone that his indoctrination did not prepare him for. He is assigned to train new recruits. Fresh initiates who have just completed their transformation and are preparing for their first deployment as scouts. He looks at these young warriors and sees himself decades ago. Except he cannot quite remember being that young, being that inexperienced. The recruits look at him with reverence. He is a veteran, a warrior who has survived over a century of the galaxy's most brutal warfare. To them, he is ancient, at 120 years old. The word strikes him as strange because he does not feel ancient. He feels exactly as he did at 50, at 70, at 90. His body has not aged in any meaningful way. His reflexes are as sharp as ever. His strength is undiminished. But these recruits, who were not even born when he fought his first campaign, see him as a venerable elder. And he begins to understand that his perception of time is fundamentally different from theirs. He trains the recruits, teaches them the lessons he has learned through decades of combat. How to clear a space hulk, how to fight in zero gravity, how to maintain discipline when a Chaos champion is screaming blasphemies that would drive a normal human mad. The recruits absorb this knowledge with the enhanced learning capacity of their modified brains. Then they deploy on their first campaign. Some survive, some do not. The ones who die are mourned according to chapter tradition, their genes seed harvested to create new warriors. The ones who survive return, slightly more experienced, slightly less naive, and the cycle continues. More recruits, more training, more campaigns. The Space Marine, who is now a veteran sergeant, continues his service. He fights battles that would earn him legendary status among baseline humans, but which are merely expected performance for the Adeptus Astartes. He receives commendations and awards that he places in his quarters, and then forgets about, because there is always another battle requiring his attention. Somewhere in his second century, usually around the 150th year, the veteran begins to notice something else. The battle, brothers he served with during his first decades are mostly gone. Not all of them, but most. Fallen in combat on worlds whose names he can barely remember. Their names are inscribed in the chapter's halls of remembrance, honored in death as they were honored in life. He attends their memorial services when he is not deployed. He speaks the traditional words of farewell, and he continues fighting. New faces replace the old, fresh battle brothers, eager to prove themselves. Carrying gene, seed harvested from warriors the veteran once knew. He tries to form bonds with these new brothers, but it becomes difficult. Not because they are unworthy, or because he has become cold, but because experience has taught him that most of them will not survive to see their second century. Why invest emotional energy in relationships that will likely end in another memorial service, another name carved in stone? This is when the veteran begins to understand the true nature of his existence. He is not simply a warrior who happens to have a long lifespan. He is a witness to endless cycles of death and replacement. The chapter continues. The Imperium endures, but individuals, even enhanced individuals, are temporary. Everyone except him, apparently, and the handful of other veterans who have somehow survived to their second century. The psychological impact of this realization varies among Space Marines. Some retreat into ritual and routine, finding comfort in the unchanging nature of the chapter's traditions. Some become even more fanatical in their devotion to the Emperor, channeling their growing sense of temporal dislocation into religious fervor. Some begin to detach emotionally, treating their battle brothers as fungible assets rather than individuals worth knowing. And some, a rare few, begin to experience the first cracks in their conditioning. Moments of existential dread that slip through the mental walls constructed by decades of hypno-indoctrination. By the time the veteran reaches his 200th year of service, he has fought in over 100 campaigns. He has killed enemies numbering in the tens of thousands. He has seen worlds burn and civilizations end. He has watched Marines die in ways that would haunt a normal human for the rest of their life, but which he simply catalogues as tactical data for future reference. He has become exactly what the Emperor designed: an efficient, emotionless killing machine wrapped in ceramite and faith. But beneath that conditioning, buried deep where even the hypno-indoctrination cannot fully suppress it, a question begins to form. A question that will grow stronger with each passing decade. A question that, in another 3 centuries, will become the horrifying realization that defines this story. The question is simple: how long have I been doing this? The 3rd century of service is when temporal disorientation transitions from a minor inconvenience to a genuine problem. The veteran, now promoted to positions of significant authority within his chapter, begins to experience memory issues that cannot be explained by simple battle fatigue or the fog of war. He is planning an assault on a fortress world held by Chaos forces. The tactical situation triggers a memory of a similar operation. He reaches for the details, trying to recall what worked and what failed in that previous battle. The memory is there, crystal clear in its specifics. He can remember the exact configuration of the enemy defenses, the precise sequence of breaches his squad made, the feel of the bolter in his hands as he cleared room after room of heretics. What he cannot remember is when it happened. The veteran checks his personal logs, the records that every Space Marine keeps of their campaigns. He finds the battle he remembers. It occurred 137 years ago. 137 years. More than a baseline human's entire lifetime has passed since that assault, and to him it feels like it could have been last month. The memory is vivid and immediate, undiminished by the passage of time, but it is also detached from any chronological context. It exists in his mind as a pure tactical experience, floating free from the concept of when it actually occurred. This happens more and more frequently as the 3rd century progresses. Memories remain sharp, but their temporal placement becomes increasingly uncertain. The veteran can recall thousands of battles, but organizing them into a coherent timeline becomes impossible without consulting external records. And even those records begin to lose meaning, because the numbers on them, the dates and years and mission designations, are just abstract data. What does it mean to say a campaign occurred in 823 M41 versus 891 M41? Both feel equally distant and equally immediate. The conditioning that makes Space Marines immune to fear and doubt was never designed to handle this kind of cognitive dissonance. Hypno-indoctrination can suppress emotions and strengthen loyalty, but it cannot make the brain immune to the fundamental problem of trying to maintain a coherent sense of self across centuries of identical experiences. The veteran is not going mad, exactly. His enhanced mind is too robust for that, but he is experiencing something that might be considered a transhuman version of dissociation. During this century, the veteran also begins to notice changes in how he relates to baseline humans. Not contempt, exactly. The indoctrination taught him to value human life and protect the citizens of the Imperium, but something else. A profound disconnection born from the realization that he and they exist on completely different timescales. He fights alongside an Imperial Guard regiment. The colonel is a capable commander, middle-aged by baseline standards, with decades of military experience. To the Space Marine veteran, this colonel is an infant. The veteran has boots that are older than this man. He has fought campaigns that began and ended before this colonel was born. The colonel treats the Space Marine with the deference due to an Adeptus Astartes, speaking respectfully and following the veteran's tactical advice. And the veteran looks at this man and sees a Mayfly, here for a brief moment, then gone, replaced by the next colonel who will also age and die, while the Space Marine continues his eternal service. The psychological term for what the veteran experiences would be called temporal alienation, if such concepts existed in the Imperium's understanding of transhuman psychology. He knows intellectually that he exists in the same timeline as baseline humans. He knows that when they say years ago, they mean the same measurement of time that he uses. But experientially, their years and his years are completely different. Their decades are his eye blinks. Their lifetimes are his campaigns. This alienation extends to his own chapter. The 3rd century is when the veteran begins to notice that he is one of the oldest space marines still in active service. There are others, certainly. The chapter maintains records of battle, brothers who have served for 300, 400, even 500 years. But they are rare. Most marines die long before reaching their 3rd century. The fortress monastery's halls of remembrance hold thousands of names of brothers who fell in battle with less than a century of service. The veteran walks those halls sometimes, reading the inscriptions, noting how few names have service dates that extend as long as his. He also notices that the chapter's leadership is changing around him. The captain who led his company when he first became a full battle brother is long dead, killed in action during a campaign whose name the veteran can barely recall. That captain's successor has also fallen. The current captain is on his 3rd iteration in the veteran's lifetime. The chapter master himself has changed twice. These leaders are venerable warriors in their own right, with centuries of service. But they are younger than the veteran. They seek his counsel because his experience stretches back to before they were recruited. There is a tradition in many chapters. When a space marine reaches a certain age, usually around 250 to 300 years, they are granted the title of ancient, even if they have not yet been interred in a dreadnought. It is a mark of respect, recognition that they have survived long enough to become living links to the chapter's past. The veteran receives this title during his 3rd century. He accepts it with the appropriate humility and continues his service. But privately, in the rare moments when he is alone with his thoughts, the title troubles him. Ancient. 250 years old. Ancient. Half a millennium of existence, and he is considered ancient. What does that make him? What will he be if he survives another century? 2 more. 3. The 3rd century is also when the veteran begins to lose the ability to relate to new recruits. He still trains them when assigned to do so. He still imparts tactical knowledge and combat doctrine. But when a fresh initiate asks him about his experiences, asks what it is like to serve the Emperor for so long, the veteran finds that he does not know how to answer. How can he explain centuries of war to someone who has never fought a single battle? How can he convey the strange compression of time that makes 100 years feel simultaneously like yesterday and like a lifetime ago? He tries to tell them about specific campaigns, about the siege of Kadrilak where he held a breach for 16 hours against endless waves of Tyranids, about the Space Hulk clearance where his squad fought Genestealers in zero gravity for 3 days straight, about the time he dueled a Chaos Champion in single combat while fires raged around them and his squad's Vox caster blared litanies of hate. The recruits listen with wide eyes, absorbing these stories as inspiration for their own coming trials. What the veteran does not tell them is how those memories, vivid as they are, have lost their emotional weight. He can recall the tactical details perfectly, the exact sequence of shots fired, the precise angle of each blade strike, the specific timing of grenade throws. But the fear he should have felt, the anger, the satisfaction of victory, these emotions are absent from the memories. They are there in the recordings, stored in his enhanced brain with perfect fidelity, but they feel like they belong to someone else, like he is recounting a battle that happened to a different person. This emotional detachment is, in one sense, beneficial. It allows him to fight without hesitation, to make decisions unclouded by sentiment. But it also means that each battle becomes increasingly similar to every other battle. They blur together into a continuous stream of violence that has no clear beginning and, more importantly, no conceivable end. The veteran knows, intellectually, that he could die in battle at any moment. A lucky shot from an enemy, a tactical miscalculation, simple bad fortune. Death is always one heartbeat away, even for the Emperor's finest. But emotionally, He has stopped believing in his own mortality. He has survived too much, fought too long. Death happens to other Marines, young ones, unlucky ones, but not to him. He is ancient, he endures, and so the 3rd century passes. More campaigns, more worlds, more enemies slain and brothers lost. The veteran's armor bears so many kill markings and campaign badges that its original color is barely visible beneath the accumulated honors. His service record fills data, slates that must be archived because a single cogitator cannot hold them all. He is promoted to leadership positions that grant him authority over entire companies. He becomes a legend within his chapter, a warrior whose deeds are recounted to inspire younger Marines. But inside, where the hypno-indoctrination cannot fully reach, a strange hollowness begins to grow. The veteran has lived for nearly 3 centuries. He has forgotten more battles than most Marines will ever fight. He has outlived everyone he knew as a child, outlived most of his battle brothers, outlived the governors and generals, and other authority figures he has encountered in his service. He is a ghost walking through a galaxy that continues to change around him while he remains fundamentally unchanged. And he begins to understand, though he has not yet fully articulated it even to himself, that he is caught in a trap. His enhanced body will not age. His conditioning will not allow him to quit. His duty demands that he continue fighting until death finally claims him. He is immortal in function if not in fact. And immortality, he is beginning to realize, is not a blessing. It is a curse. The 4th century is when the breaking point approaches, when the slow accumulation of temporal dislocation and existential weight reaches a critical mass. When the veteran begins to truly comprehend what it means to have been fighting for 400 years. The realization does not come all at once. It builds gradually, across decades, through a series of small moments that collectively shatter whatever remained of the veteran's sense of normalcy. There is a campaign against a rebellion on a hive world. The veteran has fought rebellions before, countless times. Heretics seduced by chaos promises must be purged, order restored, the Imperium's authority re-established. Standard operation. But during the fighting, as he clears a hab, block filled with cultists, the veteran has a strange thought. He has been in this exact tactical situation before. Not similar, exact. The same type of building, the same urban warfare parameters, the same enemy tactics. He searches his memory for when and where, expecting to find a mission from a few decades ago, maybe a century. The answer, when it surfaces, is shocking. The veteran has fought this exact battle configuration 3 separate times across 400 years of service. Different worlds, different heretics, different squad compositions, but the fundamental tactical situation, the basic geometry of close quarters urban combat against lightly armed but fanatical enemies, has occurred 83 times, and he can remember each instance perfectly, yet they have all merged into a single generic memory labeled Heretic Purge, Urban Environment. This triggers a cascade of realizations. He has fought orcs more than 300 times, Tyranids over 100, Chaos Space Marines 47 times, Traitor Guard formations 81 times. The numbers keep coming, his enhanced memory catalog providing data that his mind was not meant to process in this way. He has performed boarding actions 212 times, planetary assault deployments 349 times, held defensive positions against overwhelming odds 193 times. The veteran stops in the middle of the hab, block cultist bodies scattered around him, and truly grasps for the first time what 400 years of constant warfare means. It means that he has fought the same battles, over and over again, until they have lost all meaning beyond their tactical parameters. It means that every enemy he faces is just a variant of enemies he has faced before. It means that the galaxy, for all its variety and horror, has become predictable. This is not how war is supposed to feel, he thinks, surprising himself with the clarity of the thought. War should be chaos, uncertainty, danger. But when you have fought for 4 centuries, when you have seen every tactical situation multiple times, when you have learned through brutal repetition how to counter every enemy the galaxy can produce, war becomes routine. Dangerous routine, certainly. Deadly routine. but routine nonetheless. The campaign ends. The rebellion is crushed. The veteran returns to the fortress monastery. He goes through the rituals of weapon maintenance, armor repair, devotional prayers. He has performed these same rituals thousands of times. They comfort him because they are familiar, because they provide structure to the endless cycle of deployment and return. But they also reinforce the realization he had in that hab block. Everything is routine. Everything is repetition. 400 years, and nothing has fundamentally changed. He tries to remember his recruitment world, the planet where he was born, where he spent those first 10 or 12 years before the chapter took him. He can recall certain details. A harsh climate, he thinks. Mountains, maybe. Or was it desert? The details are vague, distorted by time and the indoctrination that reshaped his memories. He cannot remember his original name, cannot remember his family, if he had one. Cannot remember what he wanted to be before the chapter showed him that there was only one thing he could be. The veteran accesses the chapter's records, looking for information about his homeworld. What he finds disturbs him more than any battlefield horror. His recruitment world was destroyed 180 years ago. An orc invasion overran the planet's defenses. Rather than allow it to fall to Xenos control, the Imperium performed exterminatus. The entire planet was reduced to a lifeless rock, its population of billions erased in nuclear fire. This occurred 180 years ago, and the veteran had no idea. The world where he was born, where he spent his childhood, has been a dead cinder floating in space for nearly 2 centuries. And he never knew because he was deployed on the other side of the galaxy when it happened. He tries to feel something about this. Grief, anger, loss, anything. But there is only a distant sense of intellectual acknowledgement. His homeworld is gone. The thought should carry emotional weight, but it does not. Those mountains or deserts, whatever they were, meant nothing to him. Had meant nothing for centuries. He is a space marine of his chapter. He has no home except the fortress monastery, no family except his battle brothers, no identity except the one created by gene, seed and conditioning. But the realization that his birthplace has been dead for 180 years creates a crack in something, a fissure in the mental architecture that has sustained him through 4 centuries. Because if his homeworld is gone, if everyone he might have known as a child has been dead for nearly 200 years, then what connection does he have to anything? What ties him to any point in time, except the eternal now of combat? The 4th century is also when the veteran begins to notice changes in the younger Marines that disturb him. Not in their abilities or their devotion, but in how they perceive him. He overhears a conversation between 2 brothers who have served for perhaps 50 years each. They are discussing an upcoming campaign, debating tactics. One of them suggests asking the veteran for advice. The other agrees, but adds, if we can understand what he tells us. Ancient warriors sometimes speak in references we cannot follow. This comment strikes the veteran as strange. He speaks the same High Gothic as every other Marine. He uses standard tactical terminology. What references could they not follow? But then he thinks about a recent training session where he tried to explain a tactical formation to scouts. He based the explanation on a campaign he fought during his 2nd century, referencing battles and commanders that made perfect sense to him. The scouts nodded and claimed to understand, but their confusion was evident. To them, events from 200 years ago might as well be ancient history. They cannot relate to them experientially because those events occurred before they were born, before their instructors were born. Before their instructors were born in some cases. The veteran is becoming, he realizes, disconnected even from his own chapter. His service dates back so far that he is outliving the institutional memory of the warriors around him. He fought alongside heroes whose names are now carved in the halls of remembrance, legends to the younger generation, but merely departed comrades to him. He remembers tactical doctrines that have since been updated or replaced. He recalls threats that have been eliminated or evolved into new forms. His lived experience stretches across a gulf of time that makes him incomprehensible to Marines with a mere century or two of service. This isolation deepens when the veteran is assigned to train a new batch of scouts. He looks at these initiates, fresh from their transformation, eager to begin their service. They are 16, perhaps 18 years old. The veteran is 412. The age gap is so vast that it defies comprehension. He has served the Emperor for longer than 20, 5 of these scouts' lifetimes put together. What can he possibly say to them that they will understand? He tries anyway. Tells them about maintaining focus during extended operations, about the importance of squad cohesion, about knowing when to show mercy and when mercy is weakness. The scouts absorb this instruction, but the veteran can see that they are not truly processing it. How can they? They have never fought a battle, never killed an enemy, never watched a brother die. His words are just abstract concepts to them. They will not gain meaning until the scouts experience combat themselves, and the veteran realizes, with a clarity that borders on horror, that he has had this exact same thought thousands of times before. He has trained countless scouts across 4 centuries, given them the same advice, watched some survive and some die, repeated the cycle endlessly. The scouts in front of him are not individuals. They are the latest iteration of an endless procession of young warriors who will either die quickly or, if they are skilled and fortunate, might eventually stand where he stands now. 4 centuries old and wondering how they reached this point. The 4th century is when the veteran begins to articulate the question that has been building since his 2nd century, the question that will define his 5th century and beyond. The question is not, how long have I been fighting? He knows the answer to that. 400 years, give or take. The question is, how much longer? Because there is no retirement for a space marine, no honorable discharge after sufficient service, no quiet life in peaceful contemplation. There is only war. The veteran will fight until he dies, or until his body fails so catastrophically that the only option is interment in a dreadnought, which is not an end to service but merely a change in form. He cannot choose to stop. His conditioning will not allow it. His duty forbids it. The chapter needs him. The Imperium needs him. The Emperor needs him. But what does he need? The question surfaces unbidden, a thought that should have been suppressed by decades of hypno-indoctrination. Space Marines are not supposed to think in terms of personal needs. Their needs are the Emperor's needs. Their desires are to serve and die in service. But the veteran cannot suppress the question once it has formed. What does he need? Rest, peace, an end to the endless cycle of war. He does not know, cannot know, because to truly answer would require stepping outside his conditioning, examining himself as something other than a weapon. And weapons do not have needs. They have functions. The veteran's function is to fight. He has been fighting for 400 years. He will fight for however many more years remain until death claims him. That is what he is. That is all he is. The 4th century ends without ceremony or acknowledgement. There is no gathering to celebrate 400 years of service, no special honor bestowed. The veteran simply continues his duty, as he has always done, as he will always do. But something has fundamentally changed in how he perceives that duty. The cracks that began forming in his 3rd century have widened into chasms. The question of, how much longer, echoes in his mind during the brief moments between battles. And he begins to understand that he is approaching the most horrifying realization of all, the realization that he has been fighting for 500 years and has lost all memory of why he began. The 5th century, 500 years of continuous warfare. To put this in perspective, when the veteran was first recruited, the Imperium was fighting wars that have long since been concluded, forgotten, or classified. Technologies that are now standard were experimental. Tactics that are now doctrine were being field tested. Entire chapters that now exist had not yet been founded. And through all those centuries, through all those changes, the veteran has remained fundamentally unchanged. Fighting, killing, surviving. At 500 years of age, the veteran has reached a point that fewer than 1% of Space Marines ever reach. He is, by any reasonable measure, ancient. The oldest warriors in his chapter, Excluding those interred in dreadnoughts, number perhaps a dozen. Most of them are in positions of extreme authority, chapter masters or equivalent ranks, their centuries of experience deemed too valuable to risk in frontline combat. But the veteran, through a combination of skill and stubborn refusal to accept command positions that would remove him from direct action, remains in active deployment. He does this not out of devotion or desire for glory, but because combat is all he knows. The idea of taking a purely advisory role, of spending his days in strategic planning rather than tactical execution, is incomprehensible to him. He is a warrior, has been nothing but a warrior for 5 centuries. To stop fighting would be to stop existing in any meaningful way. But the fighting has changed. Or rather, his perception of it has changed. Where once each battle was a distinct event with its own character and significance, now they blur into an endless continuum. He deploys to a war zone, fights, achieves victory or strategic withdrawal, returns to the fortress monastery, then deploys again. The cycle repeats with mechanical predictability. The enemies change faces but not nature. Orcs are always orcs, brutal and numerous. Chaos forces are always corrupt and blasphemous. Tyranids are always an endless swarm of teeth and claws. The specific configurations vary, but the fundamental reality is always the same: identify the enemy, engage the enemy, destroy the enemy. The veteran has killed so many enemies that the number has lost meaning. Hundreds of thousands, certainly. Possibly millions when counting the indirect kills, from artillery bombardments and orbital strikes he has directed. His weapons have tasted the blood of every major threat the galaxy produces. His armor has been painted with the viscera of Xenos, heretics, and traitors from 1,000 different worlds. He is death incarnate, the Emperor's wrath given form and purpose. But at 500 years old, he can no longer remember why any of it matters. The indoctrination tells him it matters because the Emperor commands it. The chapter's traditions tell him it matters because honor demands it. His own conditioning tells him it matters because this is what he was made to do. But experientially, emotionally, in the deep places where the enhanced organs and genetic modifications cannot reach, he feels nothing. The battles mean nothing. The victories are hollow. The defeats, when they occur, barely register. This is the moment, the horrifying moment. The realization that gives this story its title. Because at some point during his 5th century of service, the veteran looks around at a battlefield. He has fought across for months. At enemies he has killed by the hundreds. At objectives he has secured through tactics he has employed 1,000 times before, and he thinks, I have been doing this for 500 years. 500 years. And he cannot remember what he was before he started. Cannot remember his original name. Cannot remember his homeworld in any detail. Cannot remember anything about his childhood, except the vaguest impressions of harsh conditions and constant struggle. His entire identity has been subsumed by centuries of war. He is a space marine, nothing more, nothing less. A weapon forged in the Emperor's name and wielded continuously for 5 centuries. The thought should terrify him. But terror requires the capacity to fear, and that capacity was removed during his transformation. The thought should sadden him, but sadness requires attachment to what was lost, and he has no memory of what he lost. The thought should anger him, but anger requires a sense of injustice, and he knows intellectually that his service is just and necessary. So instead, the thought simply exists, a cold, factual realization that hangs in his consciousness like a judgment. 500 years of war, 500 years of killing, 500 years of duty without end and purpose without question, and ahead of him, stretching into an indeterminate future, more of the same. Another century, 2 centuries, 3. The veteran knows space marines who have served for 800 years, 900. There are dreadnoughts in his chapter's reliquary halls who have been fighting for millennia. His 5 centuries, horrifying as they seem to him now, are merely the beginning of a span that could extend until the Imperium itself falls. The veteran tries to remember what it felt like to fight his first battle, to experience combat for the first time, to feel fear and adrenaline and the primal joy of survival. But that memory if it ever existed in any meaningful form, is gone. Buried under 500 years of identical experiences, his first battle and his most recent battle are indistinguishable in his mind except for their tactical specifics. The emotional content has been erased through endless repetition. He looks at his battle brothers, the Marines who fight alongside him. Some are young, mere decades into their service. Some are veterans like himself, though none quite as old. They all have the same enhanced bodies, the same training, the same conditioning. But they still possess something he has lost. They still believe in the meaning of their service. They fight because they choose to fight, because they have been convinced through indoctrination that this is their purpose and that purpose is sufficient. The veteran used to believe that too. For 4 centuries he believed it. But 500 years has stripped away the layers of conditioning, exposed the raw mechanism underneath. He fights because stopping is impossible. Not because stopping is wrong or dishonorable, or would violate his duty. Those are just words, concepts that once carried weight but now feel hollow. He fights because stopping would require him to confront the question he has been avoiding. If he is not a warrior, what is he? The answer is nothing. He is nothing without the war. 500 years of continuous service has erased every other potential identity. He cannot be a scholar because the hypno-indoctrination filled his mind with tactical doctrine, not philosophy. He cannot be a builder because his hands have only ever destroyed, never created. He cannot be a teacher because what he would teach is how to kill more efficiently, and the galaxy does not need more efficient killers. It needs them desperately, and that is precisely the problem. So he continues, deploys to another war zone, fights another battle, kills another 1,000 enemies, returns to the fortress monastery. The cycle repeats. It has repeated for 500 years. It will repeat for however many more years he has left. And somewhere in the depths of his mind, in places the hypno-indoctrination cannot fully control, the veteran understands the true horror of his existence. He is trapped, not physically but existentially, trapped by his own enhancements, by his conditioning, by his duty, by the simple fact that he has been doing this for so long that he does not know how to do anything else. The galaxy needs its space marines. The Imperium demands their service. The Emperor requires their sacrifice. And so the veteran sacrifices, day after day, year after year, century after century. At 500 years of service, the veteran has one terrible certainty. If he continues to survive, if death continues to elude him through some combination of skill and fortune, he will reach his 6th century, his 7th. Eventually, if he is unlucky enough, his body will fail catastrophically in battle. His brothers will recover his ruined form. The apothecaries will examine him and determine that his injuries are beyond even their considerable healing arts. And then they will offer him the honor of interment in a dreadnought. The veteran knows what that means. He has fought alongside dreadnoughts, spoken with them during the rare moments when they are awakened between battles. He has seen the toll that existence takes, the confusion as they wake from sleep that might have lasted decades or centuries, the disorientation as they struggle to understand which war they are fighting now, which enemies they face, the slow degradation of their minds as the centuries of sleep and wake cycles accumulate. That will be his fate, he knows. Unless he is fortunate enough to die completely, to be killed so thoroughly that even the apothecaries cannot preserve him, he will end up entombed, sealed in a walking sarcophagus, his consciousness preserved in amniotic fluids, his senses replaced by mechanical augurs. And even that will not be the end of his service. He will continue fighting, not for another 500 years, but for 5,000, 10,000. The dreadnoughts in his chapter include warriors who fought during the Horus heresy, who have been sleeping and waking for over 10 millennia. The thought does not terrify him because terror requires emotional capacity he no longer possesses. It simply is. A future he can see clearly because he has watched it happen to countless others. The path is clear service until death or until the body fails. If the body fails, service in a different form. If that form is eventually destroyed, harvest the gene, seed and use it to create new warriors who will follow the same path. The cycle is eternal, the war is endless, and the veteran, at 500 years of age, finally understands what that means. Not intellectually, because he understood intellectually from his first days as a battle brother, but experientially, in the deep, wordless way that comes from having lived it for longer than baseline humans can imagine. He understands that there is no escape, no retirement, no peaceful end, only war. Today, tomorrow, next century, the century after that, war is all he has. War is all he will ever have. And the most horrifying part is not that this bothers him. It is that, at 500 years of age, he can barely remember it ever being any other way. The veteran deploys to another campaign, fights another battle, survives, returns. The cycle continues, as it has for 500 years, as it will for however many more years the Emperor grants him. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, that might be the most terrifying thing of all. But for some Space Marines, even the horror of 500 years of service is not the end. There is another stage, another form of existence that extends the veteran's service beyond what his organic body can sustain. When the flesh finally fails, when wounds too severe to heal accumulate, when age and combat finally extract too high a price, there is one final transformation waiting. Not death, never death, if the chapter has need of the warrior's experience. Instead, there is the dreadnought, the walking tomb. The ultimate extension of service that turns 500 years into 5,000, and sometimes longer still. The process of interment is described as an honor. The Tech Marines speak in reverent tones about preserving the fallen warrior's service to the Emperor. The chaplains invoke sacred oaths and ancient traditions. The battle, brothers gather to witness the ceremony, knowing that their comrade will continue to fight alongside them, even though his mortal form has failed. It is presented as the highest possible honor a Space Marine can receive, short of ascending to lead the chapter itself. But the veterans who have served for centuries, those who have seen what becomes of Marines interred in dreadnoughts, know the truth. The honor is real, yes. The continued service is valuable, certainly. But it is also a curse, an extension of the trap that has defined their existence for hundreds of years. The dreadnought does not free a warrior from service. It merely changes the form that service takes. The physical reality of dreadnought existence is horrifying in ways that baseline humans cannot comprehend. What remains of the Marine's organic body is placed in a sarcophagus filled with amniotic fluids. Often this is little more than a torso, vital organs, and the brain. Sometimes it is even less. The limbs are gone, replaced by the dreadnought's weapon systems. The eyes are gone, replaced by mechanical sensors. The lungs may be artificial. The heart might be augmetic. Everything that made the warrior physically human is stripped away, leaving only the essential components needed to maintain consciousness. And that consciousness is then wired directly into a walking war machine. Every sense the pilot once had is replaced by digital equivalents. Vision comes from targeters and Auspex arrays. Hearing is reduced to Vox traffic and sensor data. Touch becomes pressure readings on armor plating. The pilot cannot feel the wind on their face, because they no longer have a face. Cannot feel the ground beneath their feet, because they no longer have feet. The entire physical world is mediated through machines, translated into data that the brain must interpret as sensory experience. The psychological toll is immense. Extended neural interface with a vehicle as large and complex as a dreadnought causes severe mental stress, lethargy, confusion, dyschronometria, the sense of time becoming unreliable, and eventually senility. These conditions are well documented in the chapter's records. The Tech Marines who maintain the dreadnoughts know that the pilots' minds deteriorate over time. That is why dreadnoughts are kept in stasis between battles. Not primarily to preserve the machine, though that is important, but to preserve what remains of the pilot's sanity. But stasis has its own horrors. The pilot does not experience true sleep. Instead, they exist in a kind of half-aware limbo, consciousness dimmed but not extinguished. Dreams churn through their minds. Memories of battles fought centuries ago, mix with phantom sensations of limbs they no longer possess. Some dreadnought pilots report that stasis feels like drowning, an endless suffocation that cannot kill them because they are already beyond death. Others describe it as floating in an absolute void, alone with their thoughts for decades at a time. A few, the ones who have been interred longest, can no longer distinguish between stasis and waking. To them it is all the same, an endless grey existence punctuated by moments of clarity when their chapter needs them, and when they are awakened, the disorientation is severe. The pilot's last memory might be of a battle fought a century ago. They wake expecting to continue that fight, only to discover that the war has moved on, that their brothers from that era are dead or promoted, that the galaxy has changed in ways they cannot immediately comprehend. The tech marines and chaplains who perform the awakening ritual must spend time reorienting the pilot, explaining where they are, when they are, why they have been awakened. For the newest dreadnoughts, this process is relatively straightforward. For the ancient ones, those who have been sleeping and waking for millennia, it becomes nearly impossible. Consider Jorn the Fell-Handed, the oldest loyalist dreadnought in the Imperium. He has been serving in his iron tomb for over 10,000 years. He fought during the Horus heresy, stood in the presence of the Emperor himself, served alongside Primarchs who are now dead or lost. His memories stretch back to the very founding of the Space Marine Legions, and he has maintained those memories through 10 millennia of sleep and wake cycles, through countless battles, through periods of stasis that lasted for centuries. But even Jorn, mighty as he is, shows the strain. When he wakes, he sometimes believes he is still fighting in the heresy. He calls out for battle, brothers who have been dead for thousands of years. He issues tactical commands in dialects of High Gothic that have not been spoken in millennia. His tech marines patiently correct him, reorient him to the present. And slowly, over hours or days, Jorn's vast mind processes the information and he understands when and where he is. But the disorientation never fully fades. How could it? His last memory might be from 300 years ago, and now he is being told it is the 41st millennium, and he must fight another war. For the veteran we have been following through this story, the one who has just realized, he has been fighting for 500 years. The prospect of dreadnought interment is a looming certainty. He knows that unless he dies completely, unless he is obliterated so thoroughly that not even his gene seed can be recovered, he will eventually end up entombed. And instead of 500 years of service, he will face 5,000, 10,000. An eternity of waking and sleeping, fighting and waiting, with his sense of self slowly eroding until nothing remains but battle, protocols and tactical data. Some veterans, those rare few who survive long enough to see the path clearly, begin to seek death in battle, not suicide in any conventional sense. A Space Marine's conditioning makes genuine suicide almost impossible, a violation of duty too profound to contemplate. But they can seek glorious deaths, volunteer for the most dangerous missions, take positions that put them directly in the most intense combat, hope that the Emperor will grant them the mercy of falling in battle before their body fails and condemns them to the dreadnought. But the chapters have become wise to this over the centuries. When a veteran with 400 or 500 years of service begins volunteering for suicide missions, the chaplains intervene. They counsel the warrior, remind him of his duty, reinforce the conditioning that should make such thoughts impossible. And usually, it works. The veteran steps back from the edge, accepts that his fate is not his to choose. He will serve until the chapter determines his service is complete. And if that means interment in a dreadnought, then that is the Emperor's will. The interment ceremony, when it finally comes, is conducted with all appropriate reverence. The chapter's tech marines have prepared the dreadnought chassis, blessed every component, anointed every connection point with sacred oils. The chaplains have performed the necessary rituals, consecrated the sarcophagus that will become the warrior's new body. The battle brothers gather to witness their comrade's transformation, honoring his sacrifice. The veteran, his organic body broken beyond repair, is placed in the amniotic tank. Neural connections are established. His brain is wired directly into the dreadnought's systems. For a moment, there is disorientation so complete that thought becomes impossible. The sense of self dissolves as the warrior's consciousness expands to fill a body the size of a small vehicle. Then, slowly, perception returns. Not sight as he knew it, but targeting data. Not hearing, but vox traffic. Not touch, but sensor readings. The veteran, now the pilot, takes his first steps in his new form. The dreadnought's legs respond to his thoughts, surprisingly agile despite their massive size. He raises his arms and sees weapons where his hands once were. An assault cannon, a power fist, the tools of his trade, now permanently attached to his existence. He speaks, and his voice emerges from vox speakers, a synthesized, crackling approximation of his old vocal patterns. The chaplain addresses him formally, using the traditions established over 10,000 years. Brother Ancient, you have been granted the highest honor. Your service to the Emperor continues. You will fight in his name until the last battle is won and the galaxy knows peace. Until the galaxy knows peace. The pilot understands what that means: never. The galaxy will never know peace. He will fight until he is destroyed. And if he is not destroyed, he will fight for millennia. The trap that held him for 500 years has tightened. Now there is no possibility of escape, no hope of eventual rest. Only war, forever. The other dreadnoughts in the chapter's reliquary halls welcome him to their ranks. Ancient warriors who have served for 1,000 years, 2,000, some even longer. They speak to him through the Vox network, offering advice and camaraderie. But the pilot can hear the exhaustion in their voices, the weariness that comes from too many awakenings, too many battles, too many centuries of existence in a form that was never meant to last this long. One of the ancient dreadnoughts, a warrior interred during the 36th millennium, shares a piece of wisdom. You will forget, he says through crackling vox speakers. With each awakening, you will remember less of what you were. The memories fade, the emotions disappear. Eventually, only the warrior remains, only the duty, and that, brother, is both the blessing and the curse of our existence. The pilot wants to reject this, wants to believe that he will maintain his sense of self, no matter how many centuries pass. But he has already lost so much of who he was across 500 years of service. How much more will he lose across 5,000? 10,000? How long until he wakes from stasis and cannot remember his own name, can no longer distinguish between battles fought yesterday and wars fought millennia ago? The answer comes to him with terrible clarity. Not long. In the grand scheme of eternity, not long at all. He will forget. His memories will blur and merge until they become meaningless. His sense of identity will erode under the weight of endless war. And eventually, there will be nothing left but the machine and the programming that drives it. A weapon that can think but can no longer feel. A warrior who has forgotten why he fights, but continues fighting because that is all he knows how to do. This is the ultimate horror. Not death, but the loss of self. Not annihilation, but transformation into something that can barely be called alive. The dreadnought will continue to serve. The chapter will honor him. His battle, brothers will seek his wisdom and draw inspiration from his presence. But the warrior who once existed, the boy recruited 500 years ago, the space marine who realized with dawning horror how long he had been fighting, that consciousness will slowly dissipate like morning mist until nothing remains but echoes. And yet, the dreadnought fights, because that is what it does, what it will always do. In the fortress monastery's reliquary halls, dozens of sarcophagi wait in darkness, their pilots sleeping dreamless decades away. When the chapter needs them, they will wake, they will fight, they will return to sleep. The cycle will repeat until the Imperium itself falls, or until some enemy finally manages to destroy the walking tombs that have survived everything the galaxy has thrown at them. This is the fate that awaits any space marine who survives long enough. This is the true meaning of eternal service. Not glory, not honor, though both are present, but an existence stretched across millennia, a consciousness forced to endure beyond all reasonable limits, a warrior who cannot die and cannot rest and cannot escape the duty that defines him. The pilot settles into his sarcophagus, feeling the amniotic fluid support his broken body. The tech marines begin the shutdown sequence that will place him in stasis until the chapter needs him again. As his consciousness dims, the pilot has one final coherent thought. A thought that will fade like all the others, lost to the erosion of time and the horror of endless service. The thought is simple: I have been fighting for 500 years. In my new form, I may fight for 5,000 more, and if the Emperor wills it, I will never stop fighting, never rest, never know peace. And that is the most horrifying realization of all. Throughout the long history of the Imperium, certain space marines have become legendary for their longevity. Their names are spoken with reverence, their deeds recorded in chapter records and imperial archives. They serve as inspiration to younger warriors, proof that the Emperor's finest can survive impossible odds and continue serving for centuries, even millennia. But when examined closely, these legendary veterans also illustrate the psychological toll of extreme longevity. They are not just warriors, they are warning signs. Commander Dante of the Blood Angels stands as perhaps the most famous example of a non-dreadnought space marine who has survived to extreme age. Born in 447, M40, he has served for over 1,500 years as of the current era. For 1,100 of those years, he has borne the burden of Chapter Master, leading the Blood Angels and their successor chapters through some of the most brutal campaigns in recent Imperial history. Dante's longevity is exceptional even among space marines. Most chapter masters die within a few centuries, killed in battle or assassinated by enemies who recognize them as priority targets. But Dante survives, battle after battle. War after war, he continues to lead from the front, his golden armor a beacon of hope to his brothers and terror to his enemies. He has fought in more campaigns than some chapters have waged in their entire existence. He has slain Daemon princes and Xenos warlords. He has personally saved entire sectors from annihilation. By any measure, he is a hero of the Imperium, but the records also describe Dante's wariness. The burden of 1,500 years weighs upon him like physical chains. He has lived far longer than he should have, and that weight grows with each passing century. Those close to him report that he longs for rest, for the release that death would bring. He dreams of the moment when he can finally lay down his burden and pass into the Emperor's embrace. But duty keeps him standing. The Imperium needs him. The Blood Angels need him. The galaxy is darker than ever, and heroes of his caliber are irreplaceable. Only one thing prevents Dante from succumbing to ennui, to the crushing despair that comes from outliving everything and everyone he has known. The Blood Angels maintain scrolls of prophecies attributed to their primarch, Sanguinius. Among these prophecies is a vision of a great battle, one that will overshadow all others. A battle where a golden warrior will stand between the Emperor and the darkness. For generations, this was interpreted as Sanguinius foreseeing his own fate, his death at the hands of Horus during the Siege of Terra. But Dante believes otherwise. Through some instinct or lingering trace of his primarch's foresight, he has come to believe that the prophecy refers to him. That one day, perhaps soon, the defense of the Emperor will rest in his hands, and so he endures. 1,500 years of war, 1,500 years of loss, 1,500 years of watching brothers die and worlds burn. He endures because he believes he has one final duty to fulfill. This belief is all that sustains him. Without it, the weight of centuries would likely drive even his enhanced mind to breaking. What does it mean to have fought for 1,500 years? To have memories that stretch back to before the current Imperium's organizational structures were established. To remember tactics and strategies that are now considered ancient history. To have outlived every single person you knew as a child, every warrior you trained with, every commander you served under in your early centuries. Dante's example reveals the central tragedy of space marine longevity. The enhancements that allow them to survive for centuries do nothing to protect them from the psychological toll of actually doing so. Their bodies remain young and vital. Their minds retain perfect clarity, can recall every battle with crystalline detail. But the emotional weight, the existential burden of watching everything change, while you remain fundamentally unchanged, that accumulates relentlessly. And for Dante, after 1500 years, only the promise of a final, meaningful death keeps him fighting. Logan Grimnar, the great wolf of the Space Wolves, represents another variant of the ancient veteran. He has led his chapter for over 700 years, and likely lived for at least a century before assuming that position. His age is difficult to determine precisely because the Space Wolves do not keep records in the same meticulous way as more codex-compliant chapters. But conservative estimates place him at around 1,000 years old, possibly older. Unlike Dante, Grimnar does not appear to suffer from the same existential weariness. The Space Wolves culture emphasizes living in the moment, celebrating each victory and mourning each loss without becoming paralyzed by the weight of history. Grimnar embodies this philosophy. He fights with the same ferocity in his 10th century as he did in his first. His tactical acumen remains sharp. His leadership inspires absolute loyalty from his warriors. But this does not mean he is immune to the effects of longevity. Grimnar has watched generations of Space Wolves live and die. He has mourned brothers, trained warriors who then fell in battle, and witnessed the slow degradation of the Imperium around him. The difference is that Grimnar channels these experiences into rage and determination rather than despair. Every fallen brother becomes fuel for his hatred of the Emperor's enemies. Every defeat becomes a lesson to ensure future victory. Yet even Grimnar's ferocious vitality cannot completely mask the changes that centuries bring. Those who have served alongside him for extended periods note that he has become more reserved in some ways, more calculating. The young warrior who earned his reputation through reckless courage has been tempered by 1,000 years of experience. He still fights on the front lines, still leads charges that would make younger Marines hesitate, but he does so with the knowledge of exactly what he is risking and why. The passion remains, but it is no longer fueled by youthful enthusiasm. It is sustained by grim determination and the understanding that in the grim darkness of the far future, there can be no rest for the Emperor's champions. Then there is Bjorn the Fell-Handed, and through him we see the ultimate endpoint of Space Marine longevity. Bjorn has existed for over 10,000 years. He fought during the Great Crusade, served in Lemon Russ's personal guard, participated in the Horus Heresy. He has been awake for events that most Space Marines know only as legends. He remembers when the Emperor still walked among men. He knew the Primarchs before they were scattered or corrupted. His memories span the entire history of the Imperium. But Bjorn has not experienced those 10,000 years continuously. He has spent most of them in stasis, sleeping in his dreadnought sarcophagus in the Space Wolves' fortress monastery. The chapter wakes him only in times of dire need or when his wisdom is required for critical decisions. This means that while he has existed for 10 millennia, his subjective experience is likely measured in decades rather than centuries. The gaps between awakenings can last for hundreds of years. Each awakening is a fresh trauma. Bjorn wakes expecting to continue the war he was fighting when he entered stasis, only to discover that centuries have passed. Warriors he knew are long dead. The political landscape of the Imperium has shifted in ways he cannot immediately comprehend. Technologies have evolved or been lost, and he must rapidly orient himself to this new reality before being deployed into combat. The psychological toll is evident in the records of Bjorn's awakenings. Sometimes he emerges from stasis confused, believing he is still fighting in the heresy. Sometimes he calls out for battle, brothers who have been dead for millennia. The tech marines who maintain his dreadnought chassis have developed elaborate protocols for helping him adjust, gently correcting his temporal confusion and bringing him up to date on current events. But there are limits to how much can be done. Bjorn's mind, for all its enhancements, was not designed to handle the discontinuous experience of 10,000 years. What makes Bjorn's case particularly poignant is that he is fully aware of his condition. In his moments of clarity, he understands that his memory is failing, that each sleep cycle erodes a bit more of who he was. He knows that eventually, if he continues to be awakened and put back in stasis, there will come a time when he no longer recognizes himself. When the warrior who fought beside Liman Russ will be gone, replaced by a collection of battle protocols and fragmentary memories piloting a dreadnought chassis. Yet Jorn continues to serve. Because that is what he has always done. Because the Space Wolves revere him as a living link to their Primarch and their history. Because the Imperium needs every warrior it can field, and an ancient dreadnought who remembers the Great Crusade is a weapon too valuable to discard. So Jorn wakes, fights, and returns to sleep. The cycle repeats, and with each repetition, a bit more of the man is lost, replaced by the machine. These three examples, Dante, Grimnar, and Jorn, illustrate the spectrum of how Space Marines cope with extreme longevity. Dante endures through hope for a final, meaningful purpose. Grimnar channels his experiences into endless fury. Jorn exists in a fractured state, sleeping away the centuries and waking only when needed. But all three share a common thread. They have survived far beyond what should be possible, and that survival has cost them in ways that are difficult for outsiders to comprehend. There are others, of course. Every chapter maintains records of ancient veterans who have served for half a millennium or more. Some have adapted better than others. Some have found ways to maintain their sense of self across the centuries. Others have slowly eroded into something that barely resembles the warriors they once were. But all of them understand, whether they can articulate it or not, that they are trapped. Caught between duty and desire, between the call to serve and the longing for rest, between the honor of continued existence and the curse of never being allowed to truly die. And for every ancient veteran who has learned to cope with their longevity, there are countless others who have not survived long enough to face that challenge. The galaxy is a meat grinder. Most Space Marines die within their first century. Those who survive to their second century are exceptional. Those who reach their third are legendary. And those few who push past 500 years, past 1,000, past 5,000 in the case of dreadnoughts, they become monuments, living symbols of endurance and sacrifice, but also, if examined honestly, warnings of what happens when warriors are forced to serve for longer than any mind should have to endure. The psychological toll of extreme longevity in Space Marines is a topic that the Imperium's institutions rarely discuss openly. The chaplains who minister to these warriors understand that their charges are struggling with existential burdens that have no clear solutions. The apothecaries who monitor their physical health can document the ways their bodies continue to function across centuries. But the inner experience, the subjective reality of having fought for 500 years, for 1,000, for 10,000, that remains largely invisible. Because to acknowledge it fully would be to acknowledge that the Space Marine creation process, for all its biological and psychological sophistication, has a flaw. That the warriors it produces can survive far longer than their minds were designed to handle. That the very enhancements that make them superhuman also trap them in a form of extended existence that can become its own special kind of torture. But the Imperium does not have the luxury of addressing this flaw. It needs its Space Marines. Needs them desperately. The galaxy produces an endless supply of threats, and only the Emperor's finest warriors can stand against them. So the ancient veterans continue to serve. They fight their battles and carry their burdens and hope that one day, perhaps, they will be granted the mercy of a final death. And when their bodies fail, and the Tech Marines offer them interment in a dreadnought, they accept. Because that is what they were made to do. Because duty demands it. Because in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And warriors do not get to choose when their war ends. The chapters themselves have developed various mechanisms for managing their ancient veterans, recognizing that while these warriors are immensely valuable, they also require special consideration. The approaches vary by chapter culture and tradition, but certain patterns emerge across the Adeptus Astartes. Many chapters maintain positions of honor for their most ancient warriors, roles that remove them from direct combat without completely sidelining them. These veterans become advisors, trainers, and living repositories of tactical knowledge. They spend their time analyzing battle reports, studying enemy tactics, and mentoring younger warriors. This serves a dual purpose. It preserves the veterans' accumulated wisdom while reducing their exposure to the constant trauma of frontline combat. The Ultramarines, for instance, frequently assign their most ancient battle brothers to positions within the chapter's vast bureaucratic structure. A veteran with 500 years of experience might oversee the training of new recruits, develop tactical doctrines, or manage the chapter's relations with other imperial institutions. This approach recognizes that while the veteran's combat experience is valuable, his true worth lies in his ability to pass that knowledge to future generations. Similarly, many chapters rotate their ancient veterans through different roles, preventing them from becoming too detached from active service while also giving them periodic respite from the most intense combat operations. A veteran might serve a few decades in frontline combat, then rotate to a training position for a decade or two, then return to active deployment. This cycling helps maintain the veteran's combat edge, while acknowledging that even enhanced warriors benefit from occasional breaks from the constant stress of warfare. The chaplains play a crucial role in managing the psychological health of ancient veterans. They conduct regular counseling sessions, monitoring for signs of breakdown or existential crisis. When a veteran shows indications of struggling with the weight of their service, the chaplain intervenes with a combination of spiritual guidance, reinforcement of indoctrination, and practical advice. Sometimes this is enough, sometimes it is not. In cases where a veteran's psychological state deteriorates to the point where they can no longer function effectively, chapters have limited options. The warrior cannot simply be retired or discharged. Their conditioning makes such concepts almost incomprehensible. Instead, they might be assigned to less demanding roles, given duties that keep them occupied without placing them in situations where their impaired judgment could endanger others. The most severe cases, those where the veteran's mind has fractured so completely that they can no longer be trusted in any capacity, result in internment in a dreadnought, even if the warrior's physical body is still functional. This is presented as an honor, but it also serves as a practical solution. The dreadnought systems can compensate for certain types of mental degradation, and the stasis cycles between deployments prevent the worst symptoms from manifesting continuously. But this approach has its own problems. A veteran interred in a dreadnought, while their mind is already fragmented, will not improve with time. Each stasis cycle might actually worsen their condition, and each awakening becomes more difficult as they struggle to maintain coherence. These unfortunate warriors often end up as last resort weapons, awakened only when the chapter faces existential threats and needs every available fighter. Regardless of their mental state, the chapters also maintain extensive records of their ancient veterans, documenting not just their combat achievements, but also their psychological states over time. These records serve multiple purposes. They help identify patterns of mental degradation, allowing chaplains and apothecaries to develop better support strategies. They provide data for understanding how different types of warriors cope with longevity. A battle brother who spent most of their service in frontline combat might degrade differently than one who rotated through various roles, and they serve as case studies for managing future generations of veterans. What these records reveal, when analyzed across multiple chapters and centuries of data, is deeply troubling. Almost all Space Marines who survive past their 4th century show some signs of temporal disorientation. Memory issues become common after the 3rd century. Emotional detachment, the inability to form new bonds with battle brothers, typically manifests around the 400-year mark. And veterans approaching or surpassing 500 years almost universally report experiencing some version of the realization this story centers on: the horrifying understanding that they have been fighting for longer than they can truly comprehend. The chapters recognize this pattern, but have no solution for it. The same enhancements that allow Space Marines to survive for centuries make it nearly impossible to meaningfully alter their psychological state. You cannot simply reverse the hypno, indoctrination and conditioning that defines them. You cannot remove the gene, seed organs that sustain their extended lifespan. And you certainly cannot give them the one thing they increasingly crave: an end to their service. So the chapters do what they have always done. They honor their ancient veterans, deploy them where their experience is most valuable, and accept that a certain percentage will eventually break under the weight of centuries. It is not ideal, but in the context of the Imperium's endless wars, it is sufficient. The ancient veterans continue to fight. Their wisdom continues to guide younger generations. And when they finally fall, either in battle or to the creeping dissolution of their minds, new veterans rise to take their place. The cycle continues. From the perspective of the chapters, this system works. Ancient veterans are assets to be managed, not individuals to be saved from their own longevity. The emotional and psychological costs they pay are unfortunate but necessary sacrifices in service to the Emperor. After all, every Space Marine accepts from the beginning that their life belongs to the Imperium, that they will serve until death claims them. The fact that some serve for centuries rather than decades does not change this fundamental truth. But from the perspective of the veterans themselves, the chapter's clinical approach to their condition can feel like abandonment. They have given everything, sacrificed not just their lives, but their very identities, and in return they receive management protocols and bureaucratic solutions to existential problems that have no real answers. The chaplains mean well, the records are thorough, the support systems are as good as they can be, but none of it addresses the core issue, that a Space Marine who has served for 500 years is fundamentally alone in their experience. No amount of counseling or duty rotation can change the fact that they have outlived everything and everyone they once knew, and will likely outlive everything and everyone they currently know. This isolation deepens over time. The veteran becomes increasingly unable to relate to younger battle brothers, who in turn find the ancient warrior incomprehensible. The gulf of centuries makes meaningful communication difficult, and so the veteran retreats further into themselves, into their memories and their duty, becoming more machine-like with each passing decade. Not because their humanity has been destroyed, but because maintaining it requires connections to others, and those connections become impossible to sustain across the vast expanse of time. The chapters see this happening. They document it, analyze it, and continue to deploy their ancient veterans in service to the Emperor. Because that is what the Imperium requires. Not perfect warriors, but sufficient ones. Not happy servants, but obedient ones. And as long as the ancient veterans continue to function in their roles, continue to fight and kill and serve, the system is working as intended. Even if, for the veterans themselves, the system has become another layer of the trap they cannot escape. In the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, the concept of eternal service takes on a meaning that borders on the literal. Space Marines do not serve for a few years and then retire. They do not complete a tour of duty and return to civilian life. They serve until death claims them, or until their bodies fail so catastrophically that only internment in a dreadnought can preserve them. And if they are interred, they continue serving for potentially thousands of years more. This is presented as noble sacrifice, as the highest expression of devotion to the Emperor. And in many ways, it is exactly that. But it is also a horror that the Imperium rarely acknowledges, because to serve eternally is to never rest, never find peace, never know anything except the constant grind of warfare. It is to watch the galaxy change around you while you remain frozen in your role as warrior. It is to accumulate memories and experiences and traumas that would break a baseline human mind, all while being unable to process or release those burdens because your conditioning demands that you continue fighting. The moment when a Space Marine realizes he has been fighting for 500 years is not just a recognition of temporal duration. It is the moment when he fully comprehends what eternal service actually means. Not glory or honor, though both are present. Not even the satisfaction of duty fulfilled, because duty is never fulfilled. There is always another war, another enemy, another battle. Eternal service means eternal war. And eternal war means that the veteran will never, ever be allowed to stop fighting as long as he draws breath. This realization comes at different points for different warriors. Some grasp it early, within their first century of service. Others do not understand until they pass their fourth or fifth century. And some, perhaps mercifully, never fully comprehend it at all. Their conditioning holds firm, their faith remains unshaken, and they continue serving without questioning what that service truly costs them. But for those who do understand, who pierce through the indoctrination and see the reality of their existence, the weight can be crushing. Because once you understand that you are trapped in eternal service, you cannot unknow it. The knowledge sits in your consciousness like a stone, heavy and immovable. Every battle becomes a reminder of all the battles you have fought before. Every deployment is another link in a chain that stretches back centuries and will continue for who knows how much longer. The veteran looks at the younger warriors around him and sees his own past, sees warriors who have not yet realized what their future holds. And he cannot warn them, because warning them would be to undermine their conditioning, to spread doubt that could affect their combat effectiveness. So he stays silent and watches them march down the same path he has walked for 5 centuries. The psychological mechanisms that humans normally use to cope with trauma and repetitive stress do not work for Space Marines. Baseline humans can process traumatic experiences through therapy, through time, through the natural healing that comes from mental distance and emotional support. Space Marines are denied all of these options. Their enhanced memory ensures that traumas remain vivid and immediate regardless of how many years have passed. Their emotional suppression prevents them from properly processing feelings, even if they wanted to. And their constant deployment means there is never time for true recovery. Just brief pauses between battles before they are thrown back into the grinder. The result is an accumulation of psychological weight that has no outlet and no relief. The veteran carries every battle he has fought, every brother he has lost, every horror he has witnessed. These experiences do not fade or soften with time. They pile up, layer upon layer, until the veteran's mind is so saturated with war that it knows nothing else. And still he must continue. Because that is what he was made for. Because duty demands it. Because in the Imperium of man, there is no mechanism for a Space Marine to simply stop fighting. Even death, when it finally comes, might not bring the release one would expect. If the veteran's gene, seed, is recovered, it will be implanted into a new recruit. Part of his genetic legacy will continue in a fresh warrior who will face the same cycle. And if his injuries are severe enough to require dreadnought interment, but not severe enough to kill him outright, then death is denied entirely. He will continue in a new form. His consciousness preserved in amniotic fluids, his service extended for potentially thousands more years. This is the ultimate trap, the final horror that awaits any Space Marine who survives long enough to see it clearly. There is no escape, no retirement, no peaceful end, only war. Today and tomorrow, and for every day that follows until the Imperium itself falls, or until some enemy finally manages to kill you so thoroughly that not even the apothecaries can preserve you. And given that Space Marines have survived wounds that would obliterate baseline humans, given that their enhanced physiology can keep them alive through injuries that should be instantly fatal, even death becomes something that might be denied indefinitely. The veteran who realizes he has been fighting for 500 years also realizes that he might fight for 500 more, or 1,000, or 5,000 if he is interred in a dreadnought. The number stops mattering after a certain point. Whether it is 500 years or 5,000, the essential truth is the same: there is no end in sight. The war will continue, he will continue, and the galaxy will grind on, devouring souls and spitting out corpses, with him as one more cog in a machine so vast that his individual suffering is meaningless in the grand scheme of things. But it is not meaningless to him. That is the cruelest part. His suffering matters to him, even if it matters to no one else. His exhaustion is real, even if no one acknowledges it. His desire for rest is genuine, even if duty forbids him from seeking it. He is trapped in an existence that he cannot escape and cannot endure, yet must endure because there is no alternative. This is what it means to be a space marine who has served for 500 years, to carry the weight of centuries, to remember wars that others have forgotten, to outlive everything you once knew and face the certainty that you will outlive everything you know now, to be a weapon that has been wielded for so long that it can barely remember being anything else, to serve the Emperor eternally, knowing that eternity is not a metaphor but a literal description of your fate. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there is only war, this is considered normal, expected, even honored. The veteran's suffering is his glory. His endurance is his virtue. His inability to stop fighting is proof of his devotion. The Imperium sees a hero. The chapter sees an invaluable asset. But the veteran himself, he sees a trap he walked into 5 centuries ago and cannot find the exit to, no matter how desperately he might wish to. So he continues, deploys to another war zone, fights another battle, kills another 1,000 enemies, returns to the fortress monastery. The cycle repeats, as it has for 500 years, as it will for however many more years remain. And if you ask him how he bears it, how he continues when the weight of centuries should have crushed him long ago, he might give you the answer that his conditioning demands duty, honor, faith in the Emperor. But in the quiet moments, in the brief spaces between battles, when he is alone with his thoughts, the veteran knows the truth. He continues not because he wants to, but because stopping is impossible. Not because he is strong, but because his enhancements will not let him be weak. Not because he has faith, though he does, but because faith is all he has left. Everything else, his identity, his humanity, his sense of self, has been worn away by 500 years of war. What remains is a warrior who fights because fighting is all he knows, all he can ever know, until death finally grants him the mercy that duty has always denied. And that, in the end, is the most horrifying realization of all. If you found this exploration into the dark reality of space marine longevity as fascinating as we did creating it, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We dive deep into the lore of Warhammer 40,000, exploring the stories that the Imperium doesn't always want to tell. The ones about the cost of service, the weight of duty, and the price of being the Emperor's finest. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we uncover another dark truth about the grim darkness of the far future. Thanks for watching, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. For some, that war has lasted longer than civilizations have existed, and it shows no sign of ending.